All right, so I guess we'll get started. So with last class we were talking about arrays, and the very last thing we did is we wrote a Java method that lets you slice an array to emulate the ability of slicing a list in Python. Right, now in Python, you know that you can, well, you might know this, right? If you wanted to make a separate copy of a list, then one way to do it is with a slice. Right, so if I have this list of numbers 10 through 15 in Python, then when I write copy equals t square bracket colon, you end up with a second list, right? So you do end up with two lists in this case, right? There's two list objects. Now, I don't know if they told you this, but what you don't end up with is you don't end up with two objects corresponding to the number 10, two objects corresponding to the number 11, and so on and so on. Right? So in Python, you end up with what's called a shallow copy. Right? So you don't actually have two lists full of the numbers 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. You've got two lists. They both contain the same things, or they both contain references to the same object. Right? So the 10 that's in list T, that corresponds to the same object that's in list copy. The 11 that's in list T corresponds to the same object that's in list copy. So you don't actually end up with independent values 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 in Python. And that's because Python uses objects to store everything. So that list T is actually a list of references to objects. Right? So there's a reference to a number 10, there's a reference to a number 11, and so on. The copy has a reference to the same number 10, the reference to the same number 11, and so on and so forth. Right? So you end up with what's called a shallow copy in Python, which is fine. It's adequate for many purposes. Right? So you could use slice, or you could use our slice method in Java that we wrote to make a copy. But if you need to copy an array in Java, the easier way to do it is with this method called clone. Right? So methods in every array in Java has a method called clone that you can use, and it will make a shallow copy of the array. Right? So yes, you can slice. You could slice, passing in 0 through 5 to copy all the elements of the list into the copy, or you can just call clone. So clone's the easier way to do it. In particular, because it's part of the standard, it's part of the language already, right? So it's built into arrays natively in Java. Whereas here, you'd have to write your own slice method and then import it into your program and then use it. All right, so if you haven't already tried out Eclipse, this is the Eclipse editor, the Eclipse IDE, right? So integrated development environment. There is a video on the OnQ website that shows you how to use this. So it shows you how to start Eclipse for the first time, create a project. I think it shows you how to create a package, and it shows you how to create a class, and then it shows you how to run stuff. Right? But it's worth showing you how to do all this again in the lecture as well. Okay, so I'm going to start out with this file called lecture 4. Right? So this class just has all the methods that were from the previous lecture. Right? So all I did was I just copied the code from PowerPoint and just pasted it into another class. Right? So I have all my array methods in this lecture 4 class. Right? If I want to try to use these methods, right? So I want to write a main method somewhere, call the methods to see if they work, and then so one way you can do this is make another class. Right? So over here in this project called CISC124 lectures, right? In this thing called default package, I'm just going to make another class. Right? And so there's lots of ways to do this in Eclipse. One is to go file, then new, and then file, file, new, and then pick. Yeah, it's really hard to do for with trackpad. And then pick class. Alternatively, you can just right-click on default package, and then you end up with this menu here that gives you new. And then I'm going to also have trouble getting this here. Okay, class. Right. And then you get this window here, and it just asks you for some information about the class. The important thing is the name. Right. So I'm just going to call this I don't know, try array methods. Here you can choose to include a public static main method for you automatically. So I'm just going to choose that. And you click finish, and then you end up with your class, right? So the IDE is designed to help you, well, it's designed to help professional programmers write code quickly, right? So instead of having to manually create the class and fill in all the stuff yourself, Eclipse has the ability to create classes with some stuff already there for you, right? Okay, so using this class, I want to call the methods that are in lecture 4, right? So if I want to use the methods in lecture 4, I have to, well, I should import the, I'm going to try to import lecture 4 and let's see what happens. Let's see if it's happy. It's not happy, right? Let's see why, right? So the import can't be resolved. Whoa, sorry. Eclipse is going to behave wonky because the font is cranked up so high. So all of these error messages are going to really screw things up. Sorry about that. All right. So it says that it can't be resolved, right? So let's get rid of that for now. Oh yeah, anytime you see something in red or orange, red in Eclipse, Eclipse is trying to tell you there's a mistake, right? So it's trying to tell you there's something that it doesn't understand. So here it doesn't understand the import, right? I'm going to comment it out for now, and let's see if we can call the methods that are in lecture 4 now. You can also see that it's screwing up the, okay, so I want to call one of these lecture 4 methods. Right? So let's call the max element method, right? To find the largest element in a list, in an array. So I need an array. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make my array. So double, let's just call it A. And I'm just going to pick some double values. And I want to find the largest value in the array, right? So we can just put in some arbitrary values. Ignore all this stuff that's popping up. This is because the font is so high that it's screwing up the graphical user interface. 1.5. Okay, so there you go. Right? And so I've got my array here, and now I just want to call the method that's in lecture 4. Right? So I want to call this method maxilem. All right, so let's see what happens here if I try to type this in. So maxilem is going to return the maximum value. Double A. Okay, there we go. And once you scroll past this gray nonsense here, sorry, again, it's not going to look right because of the, yeah. Okay, so ignore that line in gray. I can't make it go away right now. Hang on, see if I can make it go away. It's going to go away. It's not going to go away. All right, so notice here, Eclipse is not complaining, right? So it says, hey, you can actually call this method as long as you use the name lecture 4 in front, right? And before when I told you if you're going to use a class, if you're going to use a method that's in another class, you have to import that class, right? That's only true if that class happens to be what's inside what's called another package, right? So over here on the left-hand side, you can see that there's this thing. It's probably hard to read at the back, but it says default package, right? And so what Java has that Python doesn't have, it has this organizational mechanism called packages. Right? So you can create a package. You can put classes into the package. You can also put other packages into the package. Right? And so what this lets you do is it lets you organize related classes into a single place. Right? So for example, I could put all of my array methods inside several different classes, but I can put them all into a package called arrays or something like that, or array utilities or something like that. Right? And that lets me organize the classes of my program in a sensible way. Right? If you have two classes in the same package, then those two classes can call methods in the other class without importing the class. Right? As long as the methods are public. Right? So I don't need this import statement here. Now, if you make another package, right? So this is the default package, so I'm going to make another package here. I'm just going to do source and then new. So you just right-click, new, and then create a package. Right? So I'm just going to call this pkg. Right? And so there's my new package here. Right? Now, if I drag my try array methods into the other package, so let's drag it into here. Right? It's going to ask you to save. You say yes, that's fine. Right? Okay, so that's swell. So if I go down here, there's try array methods, right? And away you go. Right, so now we've got the method down here. I think this is a bad, I bet you this has a, no, it doesn't have one. Okay. So this needs to, you now need to import lecture 4. I think my Eclipse isn't, sorry. Get rid of that. Package. Thank you. And I need to say that this is, wow, this is really messed up, sorry. I should probably change the font size down. So this is really screwed up, sorry. Okay, and there we go. And now it's complaining again. Oh, yeah, right, sorry. Yeah, this is a bad example, I apologize. I'm going to have to move lecture 4 into a different package. So we'll put this one in a separate package. Let's call this arrays. We'll grab lecture 4, drag it into arrays, hopefully. Come here. Sure. Okay. Okay, and now in try array methods, you import the correct package, and away you go. Right? So you import lecture 4 from the package arrays, and away you go. Right? And so this funny name up here, right? Arrays.lecture4, right? That's what's called the fully qualified class name of lecture 4. Right? So fully qualified means that it includes all of the package names in front of the class name, right? Where the packages are separated with a period. Right? So arrays.lecture4, that's the full name of the class lecture 4. Right? Just the unqualified name of lecture 4 is just the lecture 4 class is just lecture 4. Yeah. Yeah. So as soon as you put a class into a package, right? So try array methods is in the package called PKG, right? You have to declare that it is in fact in that package PKG. Eclipse will automatically do it for you. It'll automatically insert the package statement for you. Right, unless you're copying it manually or something like that. Right? Okay, so now we import the class, and now you can use the method. Right, and then if you want to print out the method to see if it actually works, we can do that too. Right, so system.out.println, we'll just print the maximum value, like that. Right, save everything, and then to run your program, there's a little green arrow up here. Right, so it's a little green circle with an arrow in it. Right? You can just click that, and it will automatically compile and run your program. Right? If there's a mistake in your program, so let me strike the semicolon, and run that, at the bottom here in the console, right? It'll try to tell you that there's some sort of problem in your program. Right? So if you read it, always read your error messages, because the compiler's trying to tell you something useful here. Right? It says that there's an unresolved compilation problem, right? Syntax error, insert a semicolon to complete a block statement. It tells you where the error occurred, right? So it's trying to tell you that, hey, there's a problem on line 10. If you click on it, it'll even take you to line 10, right? So you just go to line 10 and you say, oh, I'm missing the semicolon. And so you stick in the semicolon, save your program, and then rerun it. Right? So whenever you see something that's in red, your program's not going to compile. Right? So you have to deal with that issue immediately. If you see something in orange/yellow, it's a funny orange-yellow color by default in Eclipse. Eclipse is trying to warn you that there's a possible problem. Right? So it's not technically an error, but it might be one. So if you ever see something in orange, pay attention to that as well, and then decide yes or no, is this actually a problem, because it may not be one. All right, so there's very quickly how you can create another class in Eclipse and then import another class so that you can use its methods. Right? As long as I'm at this, I should probably, well, we'll just leave lecture 5 there. All righty. If you need a review of that, just go back and watch the video that shows you how to use Eclipse, because it actually takes you all through all those steps and more. Right, so it actually shows you the file structure that's created by Eclipse as well. You need to know that because you need to know where your file is on your computer in order to submit it on OnQ. All right. Next lecture. So this is number 5, I think, on the list of lectures on OnQ. We want to talk about these things called char and string. So you all know what a Python string is, but you don't know what a Python char is because there are no chars in Python. Okay, so in Java, a string literal, so something that a string that you can write down, right? So a sequence of characters that you want to write in your program, right, is always delimited by double quotes, right? So right here is a string literal, right? So you know in Python you can use single, double, or triple quotes, right? In Java it's only double quotes, right? So here I've got the string rub-a-dub-dub. You can put whatever characters you want in between the double quotes, right? Now, each individual character or each individual symbol in that string is what's called a char in Java, right? Little c-h-a-r. So it's a primitive type. Right? So if I have the string s, right, then I can get an individual character from the string using this method called char@. Right? So s dot char@0 gives you back the first character of s and stores it, in this case, in the character c, right, or in the char c. Right. So strings, like Python sequences, they're indexed starting at 0. Unlike Python sequences, you cannot use the square brackets on a string to access the elements. Right? You have to use the method char@ if you want an individual character from a string. Right? Square brackets don't work on strings in Java. Right? So this would be the analog of s square bracket 0 in Python. Right? But in Python, you always get back a string. Right? So the individual letters in a string in Python are also strings. In Java, they have a special type. Right? And that type is char. Okay, now if you want to write down an individual character and you want to treat it as a char, right? So I don't want to treat it as a string, I want to treat it as a char. Then you use the single quotes, right? So this is the other thing you have to get used to. Python, single quotes can indicate a string. Java, they always indicate a single char, right? And it must be exactly one char, right? So you can have the char A, right? I can have one blank space, but you cannot have nothing in between the two single quotes, right? There is no such thing as the empty char in Java. That one doesn't work. That last one doesn't work. Okay, so char is actually an integer type in Java. It's also an integer type in C and C++, and I believe C#. So it's actually an integer. It looks like a letter, right, or a something else. It looks like a symbol, right? But it's actually an integer, right? And so the char value, so the value that's stored in memory is just some integer value. That integer value gets mapped to some symbol when you print it out. Okay, so let's ignore these two for now. Let's start down here. So if I write char c equals 65, that is a legal statement in Java, right? It's weird, but it's legal, right? So I just told you chars, they're individual symbols you write down in single quotes, right? But they're also integer values. So I can put an integer value here, and Java will treat that as a char. Or Java's happy converting that to a char is the more proper way to put that, right? So if I write down the number 65 and store that in a char, Java's perfectly happy with it. If I print it, Java prints out the uppercase A, right? So it turns out that the mapping that's used in Java maps the number 65 to the uppercase letter A. The number 66 is uppercase B, and so on through uppercase Z. Right? Now, they're just integers, so that means I can do arithmetic with char. So for example, I can take C and I can add 25 to it, right? So I can take 65, add 25 to get 90, right? And now C is the value 90, right? That's what plus equals mean, right? That's the same as saying C equals C plus 25. Right? So if I add 25 to C, you end up with the letter Z, which makes sense given what I just told you, right? If I start out at the letter A and I move 25 characters over, I end up at the letter Z. Right? Okay, now, if for some strange reason you actually want the numeric value associated with a char and you want to print it out, right, you have to do what's called a cast, which is what this funny syntax is up here. Right? So here's character.min value, right? That is remember char is just an int, so it has a smallest value and it has a largest value, right? The smallest value apparently is 0, so there are no negative char values, right? The largest value is 65,535, right? Which I think is 2 to the power 16 minus 1, if I remember correctly. I think. Right? Now, if I actually want to print out the numeric value associated with a char, right? So down here, you can see whenever you print out a char, Java translates that char into some symbol. If for some reason you want the numeric value, you have to tell Java you actually want the numeric value, right? And so the way you do that is with this funny notation here, right? So that round bracket with the int inside, right? What that is called a cast, and that's saying take the thing on the right, which is that, right, and reinterpret its value as an int value, right? So take the char value, that is character.min value, right, and treat that as an int, right? Now when you print an int, you get 0, right? Similarly, when you take character max value, right, cast it to an int, right, you'll end up with the number 65,535. Right? Rather than some strange symbol that gets printed out when you try to print the char itself directly. Right? So that right there, that's your first cast that you've seen in Java. Right? Okay, you can do some arithmetic with char, but the results are unintuitive, right? So I just told you char is just an integer value. You can do arithmetic with it. The results are very strange unless you know all the rules. Right? So, for example, I start out with the letter capital A. Right? Can I add 1 to it? So can I write C++ or plus plus C? The answer is yes. Right? You can add 1 to that. You'll get the letter B when you print it out. Right? Can I write C plus equals 1? And the answer is yes. So that's almost the same thing as C equals C plus 1. Almost. Right? That works in Java. Right? So the compiler is perfectly happy. It'll accept that. You'll now end up with the letter capital C. Can I write minus equals 1? So again, that works in Java, right? Minus equals is almost the equivalent of C equals C minus 1, right? That works in Java. You end up with the uppercase B now, right? So we started at A, go to B, go to C, go back to B, right? Now, what you cannot do in Java for funny reasons, right, is you cannot write C equals C plus 1. And this is because of the way that the rules of arithmetic work when you use what are called mixed types in Java. Right? So in Java, when the compiler sees an expression, when the compiler sees an arithmetic expression like C plus 1, right, the compiler has to decide how is it going to compute this value. Right? So the first thing it does is it checks. Right? Does C plus 1 actually make sense? Right? So in this case, C is a char. 1 is an int. Right? So maybe you can add a char to an int, or an int to a char. Right? Maybe. Right? In this case, it turns out you cannot. Right? So one more time. Java looks at the type of C. Right? What's the type of C? It's char. What is the type of 1? Right? Now remember I told you 2 lectures ago, I think, if you ever see a plain old number 1, that's an int. Right? The rules of the language say you cannot add a char to an int. Right? These ones all work. Right? So plus equals 1, minus equals 1, those all work. Right? And the reason they work is because the language says those aren't actually the exact same thing as this. Right? Most of the time they're the same thing. Right? But as far as the language is concerned, they're not actually the same thing. Right? They have the same effect if it works. Whether or not you can do this as opposed to this depends. Right? Now fortunately, you only really have to worry about this with char, short, byte, and char, short, and byte. Right? So this is an exception. It's a bit of an unusual situation. Normally when you're just working with ints, you can write this and everything's fine. Down here, I now have a char D. It's equal to whatever the value of B is. Right? And again, you get something weird. right? If I try to add C and D together, right? Again, you get an error, which is also strange, right? So what's the type of C? Well, the type of C is char, right? And what's the type of D? Well, the type of D is char, right? And so what's the problem here, right? So why can't I add C and D, right? So the answer is you can actually add them. Similarly up here, I think I misspoke. You can in fact add C in 1. The problem is what is the result at the end, right? And so that's the problem here, right? So, So C, its type is char. 1, its type is int, right? So the rules of Java arithmetic say int is wider than char, right? So an int takes up more room in memory, I guess is the easiest way to put this, right? An int takes up more room in memory than a char. So what happens is the compiler takes your char value and converts it to an int, right? And now it does int and int arithmetic. So when Java tries to do arithmetic, it always tries to make the two types the same, right? And so in this case, you end up with what's called a promotion, right? Char gets promoted to int so that it matches the wider type, right? And now the arithmetic happens as an int. You cannot store an int in a char, and that's the underlying problem in that statement there. Right. Similarly down here, now you've got a char and a char, which is weird, right? You would say, well, if I add a char and a char, I get a char. The language says that's not true, right? The language says if you add a char and a char, what actually happens is you end up adding an int and an int, right? Anything smaller than int automatically gets converted up to int. And then the arithmetic happens as int, right? This is just the way the language works, right? So you end up with, right, so you end up with an int value on the right-hand side, and you cannot store an int value in a char variable, right? Because int is wider than char. Right? So you have to watch out for that if this ever happens to you. This is very confusing when you write this. If you happen to be writing a program and then you start doing arithmetic with char, and there's good reasons for doing it, right? But when you try to compile it, nothing works, right? And it's all because of this strange rule in Java that says if you try to do arithmetic with 2 chars, right, everything gets promoted up to int, right? And then the arithmetic happens as int. Okay, so arithmetic with char is useful when you want to generate a sequence of characters, right? So if I wanted to generate the sequence of characters, in this case, AA through ZZ, right? It is in fact useful to use char, to use arithmetic, I'm sorry, right? So you can write a loop, right? Starting at A, right? Going up to and including Z, right? And adding 1 each time through the loop, right? So A, B, C, D, all the way through capital Z, right? Inside that loop, I can write another almost identical loop, right? Again, going from A through Z, right? And now I can make a string, right? So now I can build a string using the letters C and D, right? So I can write my string S. So it's the empty string plus C. All right. Now, when Java sees a string plus something, Java takes the something, converts it to its string representation. Right? So first time through the loop, it takes this char A and replaces it with the string A in this expression here. Right? It now does a string plus a string, which is string concatenation in Java. Right? So it joins the 2 strings together. Right? Empty string joined with the letter A gives you with the string A gives you back the string A. Right? So all of that is now the string A. Right? Now you have the string A plus the char D. Right? So that's a string plus a char, convert the char to string, right? And then join them together. Right? So now you get AA, AB, AC, and so on through to ZZ. Right? So that expression there looks like arithmetic, but is actually string concatenation in Java. Right? This use of the plus sign to do concatenation is what's called operator overloading in languages. Right? This is the only operator that's overloaded in Java. Right? So the only place you can use plus to do something like concatenation or something different that's not addition is with a string, right? You're not allowed to change the definition of operators anywhere else in the language. Right? If you ever get around to learning C++, you'll learn that you can, in fact, change the meaning of operators in the language. And so, for example, you can add two vectors together or multiply two matrices together or so on and so on and so forth. Right? So you can replace the meaning of operators in languages like C++. You can't do that in Java. And the only place that it happens is with the addition operator and string concatenation. Okay. Whoops. So we're about to use our first class, or I'm about to tell you about our first class. So the first class we're going to use is string. Right? And so for any of this to make sense, you need to be reminded about what is a type and what is a class, or you need to be reminded about what is a type, you have to be told what is a class, you have to be told what is an object. All right? So what's a type? So a type is just a set of values and the operations that you can do with those values. Right? So when I say the type int, what do I mean? I mean the numbers integer min value up to integer max value. Right? So those are my set of values. Right? What can I do with int? Well, I can add them, subtract them, and so on. Right? So I can do arithmetic, I can compare them, and that's about it. Right? So the int type, right? The values integer min value to integer max value, plus all of the arithmetic operations that you can do with them. Right? So that's the int type. The double type, so that's the set of values. Well, it's all of the floating point double values, right? And the operations that you can do with those, right? So it's all of the arithmetic operations that you can do with floating point values. Right? Now, you can define your own types in a language like Java, right? And so the creators of the language define this type called string. Right? What are the set of values of strings? Well, it's anything, it's any sequence of characters. Right? What can you do with them? Well, I'm going to show you what you can do with them. Right? So big S string is a type. Okay? Big S string is a type. So what is a class in Java? So a class is just a type. Right? A class defines a type in Java. Right? So they're user-defined types in Java. They're called classes. Right? They're all reference types in Java. Right? So in other words, a class is basically what a class is basically in Python. In Python, all of your types are effectively classes. Right? Whether they told you that or not, that's the case. Right? Now, finally, what is an object? So an object is what's called an instance of a class. Right? So if I have an int, right? What's an instance of an int? Well, 0 is an instance of an int. Right? 1 is an instance of an int. 24 is an instance of an int. Right? So just int values, right? If you have a class, right? So here, if I have a sum class, right? So these two are analogous, right? Then over here, you've got object, right? So 0 is an instance of an int, right? And object is just an instance of a class. That's all it means, right? All right, so what about strings? So string's a class. What does that mean? It's a type, right? Okay. What are its values? Well, any sequence of text, right? Any sequence of char is a string. And it turns out they're used pretty much in every Java program, right? So they're very widely used in Java programs. They're not just used in Java programs. They're used in most programs, right? Strings are very useful. Now, because they're so widely used, right? They're almost universal. In a Java program, right? The Java language lets you do strange things with strings that you cannot do with other types, right? So for example, you can write down a string literal, right? Double quote something, right? So string literals exist. No literals exist for any other reference type in Java, right? So there is no other reference type where you can write down what's called a literal of the type and use that in your program, right? It doesn't work. That means you can't make lists with square brackets, you can't make dictionaries with squiggly brackets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? None of that stuff works in Java. 2, the plus operator is defined for strings, right? So plus does string concatenation. That doesn't work anywhere else in the language, right? There's no other way to replace the meaning of an operator in Java, right? So the language designers went out of their way to make strings look like primitive types, which is a little bit unfortunate in some cases, but that's the way it is. Okay, so if I got a string, hello, right? And I store that in a, well, I store a reference to that string in the variable s. And let's suppose I want to convert it to uppercase, right? So if you go poking around in the string documentation, you'll discover that there's this method called toUppercase, right? So s.toUppercase, right? And if you look at the documentation for the method, it says it returns the uppercase version of the string s. Right? So in other words, it takes every character in the string and converts it to the uppercase version of that character, if that conversion exists. Right? So up is now the string. Not surprisingly, it's the string capital H, capital E, capital L, capital L, capital O. Right? Okay. Now, what happens if you print out the string s? Right? Do you get lowercase hello or do you get uppercase hello? Right? In Java, you get lowercase hello. Right? So when you write s to uppercase, okay, that does not convert the string s to uppercase. Right? What it does is it makes a new string, right? A new string object. That string object is the uppercase version of s. The original string that's referenced by s remains unchanged. Right? So, two uppercase, two lowercase, return uppercase and lowercase versions of a string without changing the original string. Right? This is one of the big mistakes that first-time Java programmers make. Right? They see some method in the string class that looks like it changes the string. Right? So to uppercase, it looks like it changes the string to an uppercase. It doesn't change the string. It gives you back a new string. Right? There is no method in the string class that lets you change a string. Okay? Remember that. There's no method in the string class that lets you change a string. Once you make a string, it's the same string forever. Right? So that string hello, H-E-L-L-O, is forever the string H-E-L-L-O. There's no way to change that string in Java. Right? I can call a method on that string, but it always gives me back a new string. Right? It does not modify the original string. In Java, strings are said to be immutable objects. Right? You cannot change the characters of a string once that string has been created. Right? So right there, that's a very common error. Right? Someone will say, hey, I'm just going to write s to uppercase, and that's going to convert s to uppercase, and then I'm going to use s later on and expect it to be an uppercase, and they're sadly mistaken. Right? That does not work in Java. Okay, whenever you call a method, if you look at the string documentation, let me pull that up right now because it's worth showing you. Okay, so if you want the documentation for a Java class, you just type in Java, the name of the class, and then if you want, you can pick the version of Java that you want to look up the documentation for. Right, so I'm just going to write Java string 8, and that's going to give me back the documentation for the version 8, Java version 8 for the string class. Right, the string class has never changed, so you don't have to worry about which version of the documentation you pull up. Okay, so here's the string class. Right, and this is what documentation for a class looks like in Java. Everything's online, everything is standard, which is nice. Right? I personally think the Java documentation is much easier to read than the Python documentation. But you may disagree. I think it's way easier to read. At the top, you'll see that there's a class called string. So that's the name of the class. Right? You'll see above that, there's this thing that says java.lang. That's the package that the string class is defined in. Right? So it's defined in the package called java.lang. Anything in java.lang, you don't have to import. Right? So string is one of the most important classes in the Java language, which is why it's in java.lang. Right? Java.lang are all the classes that are fundamental to the language. Right? So you never have to import string in your class. Right? Java automatically imports it for you. All right, we'll ignore this stuff here for now. This won't make sense until probably like 6 or 7 weeks into the course. Similarly here, this is not going to make sense. Now, there's a description of what the class is supposed to be used for. Right? So it says the string class represents character strings, right? So a sequence of characters. And it goes on for quite some time. Notice that in the second paragraph it tells you, right, string objects are immutable. Right? You cannot change a string once you create it. It also says that you can share them freely. We'll get to that later on. Right? Okay, now if you keep on scrolling through, you'll hit this section called constructor summary. We can ignore that for strings, right? So we'll ignore this for now. And now you hit your methods. Right? And now list all the methods in alphabetic order. Right? Okay, so let's look over here. So over on the left-hand side, that's the return type of the method if there is any. Right? Also on the left-hand side, if there are any modifiers, let's see if I can find one here. Right? So all of our methods are static. Right? So if you were to generate the documentation for the classes we've been writing so far, the documentation would all say static something, right? Static return value for all of our methods, right? So you can tell which methods are static in a class because they're going to say static in the documentation, right? So it looks like this method called copy value of is a static method in the string class. Anything that doesn't have static in front of it, like let me scroll down to uppercase, 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase, right? Notice these are not static, right? So there's 2 main types of methods in a Java class, right? There are static methods, there are non-static methods, right? The static methods that we've been using, you always use the name of the class to call the method, right? So a static method is what's called a, it's called a class method, right? To use the method, you use the class name to call the method, right? The method belongs to the class, right? So lecture 4, what's it called? Max LM or something like that. It's static, so maxlm belongs to the class lecture 4. Right? Now, 2 lowercase is not static, so what the heck does that mean? Right? So that means it's a per instance method, right? Or per object method. So what that means is you need an object to call this method. Right? So to call 2 uppercase or 2 lowercase, I need an object reference to call the method. Right? I cannot use the name of the class to call this method. Right? So if you wrote big S string dot 2 lowercase, it won't work, right? If you think about it for a second, you'll realize why, right? Because if I need to convert a string to uppercase, I need to know which string do I convert to lowercase, right? If I just write big S string, there is no string. That's a class, right? I need an object to call the method because it's that object that represents the string that you want to convert to uppercase or to lowercase, right? So if you are using a non-static method, and most of the methods in Java are non-static, right, then you're going to need an object, right? So to call 2 uppercase, I need an object to call that method on, right? The way you call the method is write the object name dot 2 uppercase, right? I guess to be more strict, you use the variable name dot and then the method name, right? So what is this doing? It's saying take the object that's referenced by S and call 2 uppercase on that object. Right? So take the object that's referenced by S, well that's the string hello, right? And convert those characters to uppercase and give me back that string. Right? So here you have to use an object reference to call the method. All right, string has static methods as well. I just showed them to you. Right? If you want to use a static method, you always use the class name. Right? So there's a method called value of. There's several methods called value of in the string class. Right? Value of lets you convert whatever that value is, or it doesn't convert it. It gives you the string representation of whatever this thing is over here. Right? So if I want the string representation of the double value 1.0, you can call string.value of to get that value if you wanted to. Right? You don't have to. You can always use string concatenation. Right? So if you want to get the string representation of anything in Java, you can always write empty string plus whatever it is you want to get the string representation of. Right? That always works. Right? If you really want to, you can write out string.value of. That also works. Right? But notice here, static method, use the name of the class. Right? Over here, non-static method, I need an object reference, right? Or I need a variable. Okay. So just like in Python, a string is in fact a numbered sequence, right? There's an element 0, there's an element 1, and so on and so on and so forth. Right? Each char in the sequence has an integer index starting at 0. Right? So the string, CISC124, right? The first letter, index 0, second letter, index 1, last letter, index 6, which is equal to the length of the string minus 1. Right? just the same as with the arrays in Java. Now, can you get the length of a string? Yes, you can get the length of the string. The method's called length. Right? So to get the length of the string that's referenced by course name, non-static method. So I need a variable name. Right? So course name dot length, round bracket, round bracket. Right? So that calls the length method on that string there. Right? How many characters are in that string? Well, there's 7, so you get back 7. Right? You have the notion of the empty string in Java. So this is actually an important thing, right? So there is an empty string in Java, and it turns out to be very useful, right? So the empty string, double quote, no space in between, right? What's the length of the empty string? Well, it's 0, right? And that turns out to be very useful. Okay, let's me do char at, and then we'll call it quits for today. Okay, so char at is the method that you need to use if you want to get an individual character out of a string, right? So in other words, if you ever find yourself saying, hey, I really want to use the square brackets to get a character out of a string, you have to stop and say, no, I have to use char at, right? Square brackets don't work. Right? The index must be between 0 and the length of the string minus 1, right? So again, no negative indexing in Java. You only have non-negative indexes. Right? If you try to use an index that's not valid, you get an error. Right? So if you try to use index 0 on an empty string, that's an error. Right? You get an exception when you run the program. Right? Okay, so here's my string CISC124. I want to print out every character of the string on one line. So I want to write C, then I, then S, then C. Right? So write a little loop. Starts at 0, right? Less than the length of the string. Right? Go up by 1 each time in the loop. Right? Call char at to get the character, right? And then print the character. Right? Here's another example of a method that counts the number of times a specified character appears in a string. Right? So I'm going to call the method called freq, so frequency. Right? I'm going to have a string s, and I'm going to have a character that I'm looking for in the string. Right? So a target character that I'm going to search for. Right? Returns an int, the number of times the target character appears in the string s. Right? It's static, so you always use the name strings with a capital S to call the method. Right? How do you do this? Well, you just loop over the characters of the string. Right? So the count starts at 0 because as far as I know, I've seen that character 0 times in the string so far. Right? And now loop over the characters in the string. Right? So again, start at index 0, go up to but not including the length of the string, go up by 1 each time. Right? Each time through the loop, I'm going to get the character at index I, and I'm going to check, is it equal to the target character? Right? So equals equals is the operator that you use when you want to compare 2 primitive types for equality. Right? Okay, one more time. Right? This is important. Equals equals. If you want to compare 2 primitive types for equality in Java, that's the operator you use. Okay? You have 2 reference types, that's not the operator you use. Okay? 2 primitive types, use equals equals. Right? If the 2 characters match, increase the count by 1, and then at the end, return the count. Right? There's a little example if you wanted to use the method. Right? It's not hard to use. Right? It's just strings.frequency, then the name of the string, and then the character that you're searching for. Right? And away you go. All right, so that's it for today. We'll pick this up on Thursday. Is that tomorrow? Yeah, tomorrow, right?